Okay, everyone, let's get started. Thanks so much for coming to the webinar, Starting from Scratch, Ingredients to Build a Useful Style Guide. I'm sitting here with Beth. She is from Intuit. She's a content design strategist. My name is Ashley Kuhlman. I'm the content strategist here at Cordoba. I manage our style guide. I work across our marketing and product teams, and I'll let Beth introduce herself a little bit more later. Just some quick housekeeping before we keep going. The webinar is going to last 1 hour. You will be muted today, but there is time for Q&A at the end. If you have a question, there's a Q&A box at the bottom. You can enter your questions and we'll be able to see them and answer them live. If you can't find it, just keep hunting in your Zoom window, it's there. If you tweet during the webinar, mention Cordoba, feel free to take screenshots, whatever pleases you. And we will be sending out the recording with the slides later this week. So if you miss anything or if you want to go back and revisit any of the wisdom Beth shares, you will be available to do so. And without further ado, I will let Beth jump into it.
Yikes. Well, hello, Ashley. Hello, everyone joining. It's great to be here. So Ashley, we met through my colleague, Michael Haggerty-Via at Intuit. Just want to give him a shout out here for introducing us. This has been fun,
yeah.
Collaboration.
New friendships.
Yes, definitely. Also, he and I have done presentations together before, and so some of what I'm talking about you may have seen from him. Some of the words that he says may actually be coming out of my mouth. And just to be clear, he is the guy who kind of heads up all of our style efforts at Intuit. I'm not actually in charge of those things right now anymore, thank goodness. Yeah, so let me share a little bit about myself. I'll give you my credentials, if you will, excuse me. I've been in tech for quite a while now, and I've had a lot of different roles and titles. They've all had to do with content. And I've worked on a plethora of materials at a bunch of different places, companies big, companies small. I've worked for myself. And I have been through a few dot-com booms and busts, and I've had to adapt to follow the work wherever it was. And so that means my title changed, the kind of stuff that I worked on changed, the groups that I worked with changed, and I've just had to do that to stay employed and be current. And for the last 13 years, I have been at Intuit. Started there as an editor, moved into tech writing and then content design, and I'm currently a content design strategist. And Intuit, the way it works, content design is part of the user experience or UX or experience design XD group. So we consider ourselves product designers specializing in content. So why I'm a fan of style guides. I am indeed a fan of them because they've helped me so much in my career. My first job in tech was as a proofreader, and the group that I worked on had a great style guide. It was actually printed. It was like maybe 1/4 inch thick. It was comprehensive, and I could find the info that I needed. And I had made a switch to proofreading from working in HR at a university. And so I just kind of got dumped into this proofreading job, and I would have floundered a lot more if I hadn't had that style guide. It helped me get up to speed. I had minimal training, and it really helped me figure out what my job was, what the things I was supposed to be marking and what I wasn't. Then after that job, at subsequent jobs, whenever there wasn't a style guide, it just wasn't as easy to get up to speed as quickly. So I would find myself spending time looking at existing materials and documents and digital stuff, trying to figure out what those patterns, what those style decisions were, if there had been some. I needed to bug my colleagues more, ask them questions about what was preferred, what was the precedent for this, if there was one. So of course that took up other people's times. Lots of times there would be a feeling that every writer and editor was just kind of doing their own thing. We were out of sync. And then if you were challenged about your content, I just didn't feel as confident about pushing back about my rationale, saying, like that's a preferred list, in our preferred word list, because we didn't have one. So when you asked me to come here and talk about style guides, I really had to think for a bit why I like them, because I've been used to that invisible structure for a lot of years. And so what I came up with is I don't have to sweat the small stuff. Because it's all documented for me. So I don't need to spend time thinking about, how are we showing menu commands? And, should this be bold, or should this be, should this have a period after it or not? So that lets me focus on the heart of the message. What is it that I'm actually trying to convey? And my role right now, I do a lot of product writing in the UX. And so that means I can sort of look at each screen and really figure out in the overall design, what does the user need to know in this moment? And that's given me more time to be creative. So I feel like I write much more creatively now. I have the cycles to kind of spin off and go wacky and do bunches of revs and then kind of bring it back down. And I've internalized a lot of those style rules over time. And just, having a really robust style guide like we do at Intuit, it's just like can be your first line of defense when people challenge you on content. And they will challenge you on content. I don't know if you've had this experience, but
you've been working at a style guide type company. Yes.
Yeah. It's funny. I work with a lot of designers, and content is just the easiest target in the room from everybody, so whether it's a leadership, review or an experience review or whatever. And I think it's because everybody feels like they can write to a certain level. They're either, big readers, or, I graduated, from whatever, or, I do the newsletter for my kids' school, that kind of thing. They feel much more comfortable questioning the bits and pieces of content, whereas they may not feel that confident in their visual skills or their interaction skills. And so they won't usually comment on the color of a button, right? Or is that the right progressive pattern to use in your interaction, right? But they'll question you about words. So having a really good style guide is a great way to that's your first line of defense. If it's in the style guide, if it's something you can answer with the style guide, you can go there, take that. So if you write a style guide, you're going to be a better writer. So parts of the existing Intuit style guide have my DNA in it. I'm not the current author, but I've written enough in my career to know that it's just going to make you a better writer and editor. And these are some of the skills that I thought about that it really helps you with. So research skills, you're going to want to take time to vet every entry you make in the guide. So that can mean looking at other style guides, double checking your grammar sources and style books, maybe looking at trends out in the industry and the internet, checking out your competitors. What are they using for terminology? And, are there company precedents that you need to follow or ditch? It's also going to help build up your reasoning skills. So you're going to come up with things that you want to include in the guide. And you could just have a list that is like, do this, not this, use this word, not this. But I've found that if you can provide a brief explanation, not a long one, a brief one that sort of explains where that idea came from, or gives a brief example of how it works and maybe why it's better, you're going to win people over with that. And that's sort of related to the persuasion skills bit. So if you're writing entries and you are, sorry, I'm going to back up. I had a different thought that just jumped into my head. So your persuasion skills is what I wanted to talk about. And so I don't know if you've ever been in a room with a bunch of word nerds, and we all have our pet peeves and personal opinions. And so you just have to realize that your style guide is not going to please everyone all the time with every entry. And so you're going to need to work with your team, maybe learn some compromising skills, but also learn how to persuade them over to your point of view and to using the guide itself.
And off that collaboration, right?
Yeah.
So you're building persuasion, and through that, you're learning how to compromise and when you need to choose your hills and not your hills.
Yeah, exactly. Another thing that I wanted to talk about was customer empathy. So at Intuit, we have a whole big thing about customer empathy. That's what we're known for, and we talk about it a lot. And so you can use that to build a style guide. And so the customers in this case are the other content designers, right? So the idea is that if you're creating a product, you really need to understand the people and the underlying struggles or problems that they deal with. And so to write a good guide, you're going to need to get outside of your own head and talk to the writers and editors that you work with about what their likes are, what their needs are, what are the things that they always have to look at, what do they struggle against. Yeah, so make sure you have your customer empathy hat on, is what we say. It's going to build your design skills. Now, like, you could document everything in a big, long wiki page that's full of prose, but nobody's going to like it or use it. So
easily ignored.
Easily ignored. Yeah. So you want to make it like any other design project that you're working on. You want to make it engaging, easy to use, organized, make it delightful so that people, when they're pausing and they're writing, they're all just go over and check the style guide. Mm-hmm. So yeah, use your design skills. And if you don't feel like you have any, or you don't feel confident, that's a great way to partner up with somebody. Check in with some of your designers and just get some feedback from them and get some ideas and see what they think.
Yeah.
Lastly is the relationship and influencing skills. And all these are kind of interrelated, right? We talk about reasoning and persuasion, but sometimes you may need to go way outside your group. You may need to get time or hosting space and budgeting, from leadership. So you're going to need to cultivate those relationships. Michael has talked about design systems and making sure that content is included in them, because they're not always. And so that's like a perfect example of, like, if you want to get your content into the design system, which I'm sure we both feel strongly that that's a good thing.
Yeah,
right.
We had him here for a webinar a few months ago.
Yes, I remember that.
Talk about the same thing.
Yeah, so that's an example of relationship and influencing skills, where you're really going outside your group to cultivate those friendships and relationships and show the benefits for everybody, that kind of thing. Yeah, so I have a bunch of tactical tips for creating guides in a little while, but first I thought it'd be helpful to talk about the mindset. Gosh, I keep saying a lot, I'm sorry. So if you understand the landscape and do some pre-planning and pre-thinking, your style guide project is probably going to go a lot more smoothly. So let's figure out how hungry you are for style. Do you want a cupcake or a big old slice of pretty cake? These are 3 different types of style systems. There's more, but I'm just focusing on these 3. All of them document conventions and decisions on how you want to communicate. So the style sheet is going to be the smallest. It's usually written by a writer or an editor, but it can be useful for a bunch of folks who don't have writing or editing in their job title, but sometimes have to produce content. So that can be a developer, it might be a care agent. So you really want to focus on just very specific items, things that like absolutely have to be correct, like, the product name. So for example, QuickBooks, the product that I work on, has a capital Q and a capital B, and it's, camel cased, but it gets misspelled all the time. So that's something that I would include on a style sheet for sure. On the opposite end of the spectrum is the design system. And so like a style sheet, it's going to reach beyond a content group. It's going to be there to serve UX designers, developers, marketers, brand folks, and a lot more. But right in the sweet spot in the middle is the style guide, and that is the handy dandy toolbox full of lovely little nuts and bolts for writerly folks, content people like you and me.
Before you move on,
yeah,
we talked about this a little bit before, but I'm curious to know if you have any tips for people who are trying to decide, okay, do I start with the style sheet, start with the style guide, jump directly into the design system? How do they know what makes sense for them right now?
Oh, I would always recommend starting small in the beginning. Yeah, because it just makes it easier to focus on a few things first and sort of get some practice under your belt about the types of things to include, thinking about who your audience is, how you want to write it and structure. I mean, you can definitely have dreams and goals.
We should all have dreams and
goals. We should all have dreams and
goals.
goals, yes. But to write a style guide or to design, work on a design system. But I just always recommend starting small and seeing how it feels, and then thinking about how you want to progress from there.
Great, thanks.
Actually, that's making me think too. Like we had talked about Cordoba and the services that you guys offer, and I think that's a good place to start too. Is because you've taken a lot of things that can be correct in a bunch of different ways, like punctuation or capitalization style, and you ask people to make choices on those things. And then it kind of spits out a style guide for you. Right.
It does.
So that could be a great place to start. There may be other tools out there too, but I just recommend starting small first and then building.
Great, thank you.
So let's talk about that sweet spot, the style guide, and because I'm thinking that that's probably what most people tuned in today for. So that's mostly for writers and editors, right? The main people whose main job it is to produce content, and a style guide is meant to document your house style and writing conventions. So it's going to streamline the work for the writers because you don't have to, and editors, because you don't have to endlessly revisit style debates, grammar issues, word preferences, brand spellings, and stuff. And when you have the mechanics nailed down, writers and editors have more time to focus on the meat of the message. So some things to think about before you get going is, it's going to be tempting to jump in and start listing a bunch of words, but it's worth spending a little time thinking about a rough game plan first. So let's talk about the audience. It's really critical to get crisp on who your audience. You can grow that vision later, but just start small, and that'll help you narrow down on the content to include. And you may be tempted to sort of write a style guide for the entire company, but you're going to find that it mushrooms out of control because it's going to be like a one-size-fits-all type guide. And, like t-shirts, one size fits all. Doesn't look good on very many people.
Tried. Doesn't work.
It doesn't work. Some more audience tips is, I talked about the customer empathy and your customer empathy hat. You just put it on, and, you are your own customer, but so are the other content folks that you work with. And so you do want to make it, easy to find, use, navigate, understand, because no one will use it if you don't. So that means seasoned writers may just need to check it occasionally. So you want to make it easy for them to get in and get out, not make them drill down into a bunch of different sections. But, if you're a new writer or just even new to the company, you may need some more overview material about like what's in the guide and how to actually use it. Another tip is don't be tempted to teach writing itself in the guide. There are plenty of books and courses for that. So just keep in mind that you're conveying style decisions. So you want to give as much guidance as needed in your entries so that they're quickly understandable and not much more.
Do you have writing books that you suggest already that you always refer to or refer other people to?
I do have favorite books. So it's really not that current anymore, but I thought the Yahoo Style Guide when it came out was really good. Gosh, now I'm blanking. There's a writer, and Woe Is I is the name of the book. And I really liked that one because you can just sort of dip in and out. Like if you're eating lunch at your desk, there's a lot of great writing stuff in there. Grammar Girl has written a bunch of books. She's got a podcast, and that's great because there's just like lots of little bite-sized nuggets that you can use. It's just what's coming to mind in the moment. I
use Grammar Girl all the time to just find things, double check myself. Sometimes you lose your train of thought and you're just, I can't remember. Now I'm double guessing my rules. And
you know what?
She's great for that.
She is great for that. And, I don't keep the names of, grammar bits in my head. And so I can sort of just like type in a weird phrase, and for some reason Grammar Girl always pops up, and then
She's been at it a while.
And then I get the rule, and then I get the name, and then I can go off and be smart and go, well, you can't use a this with a that because it's the nominative case of whatever.
Because rules.
Because rules. Because rules. Yeah, so let's see. It's going to take a while to write. It's kind of like a remodeling job. Like if you're going to, do something in your home and you bring in an expert, they're like, oh yeah, I can get that done in a week. Well, it's going to be a month, right? So
6 months.
6 months, years. So don't be surprised about that. Some other tips are don't try and fit it in around your other work because it just won't happen. You want to make sure that you're given cycles to work on it. So that can be talking to your manager or higher ups that, this is a really important thing for our group or for the company. So we need time to work on it. Make sure you put it on your calendar because, just work fire drills are always going to eat up a lot of that time. So make sure you schedule time for that. It's a good idea to chunk it out in phases, not phrases. But that way you can sort of have little mini milestones and it feels really good to kind of check things off the list. You can kind of celebrate them as you go along. Again, I keep mentioning Michael, but he's working on a big project, Intuit wide, and his team and they try and deliver chunks every 2 weeks. They use like a Scrum-like schedule.
Interesting.
Yeah, and they are announcing stuff kind of on a regular basis, and they find that they're getting a lot of work done sticking to that schedule. So you can kind of figure it out on your own, whatever organizational way fits best for scheduling, but you should try and put some structure to it. I'd recommend. And like I said, it's just going to take longer than you think. Yeah, so decisions and revisions. This is kind of about who decides. And this is going to vary from company to company, size of team. Is there a single person working on it? Are there multiples? So if you are working as part of a team, you want to talk about how you'll reach decisions and when there's a disagreement. You're going to want to talk about what you all think should be included. House conventions. Do you have voice and tone? Is that going to be folded in? Are you addressing just web or just mobile? Yeah, so it's going to be tempting to, like we say, boil the ocean, but only include what you must have because you can always add more as the guide evolves. And you want to get consensus on how much info to provide for entries. There's going to be some of you that are like, have the do this, not that, and that's sufficient. And then other folks are going to want to write big paragraphs. You probably want to aim for something more in between. So in that case, it's good if you can each sort of write up different samples of how you think the entry should look, and then stand back and assess and try and get consensus there. Sometimes when you're working on a guide and there's a bunch of people involved, it can get painful and political. So you want to keep it fair, some positive intent, keep it democratic. So it's important to give people the chance to participate and feel like their needs are being met. But ultimately, a small group of like maybe 3 people can make the decisions. And I have also found that people like to throw their ideas in and make sure they're heard, but they actually don't want to do the work of making the decision.
Not always the case.
yeah, it is always the case. So that's another reason for kind of keeping the team small. And then once the decision is handed out, whatever it is, let's use serial comma versus non-serial comma. There's always going to be some grumblers, but that dies down pretty quick.
Can you tell me at Intuit how Intuit is a fairly large company, or at least it's far larger than my own. And so how you guys have decided to build that core group that's making those decisions together, or how many people are in that group?
So at my advanced tenure in the company, I'm really more like a consultant at this point. I'm not the folks working on it, but Michael is leading. He manages a bunch of the work that goes on with the style guides, and he does delegate a lot of work. We also have voice and tone leads who take on certain responsibilities. I'm sorry, can you go back to your question? I think I've lost the essence of it there.
Just how many people you have working on the style guide together, because I know you have a centralized group really focusing on building the style guide and building out the style guide and sharing that. So how many people would you estimate you have voice and tone experts? Who else is there in the room helping make decisions or making decisions maybe spokes off your hub?
Spokes off the hub. I would say that that's pretty small, actually, because it gets the work moving more quickly. So we have Slack channels that are specifically for content. And so stuff will come up kind of dealing with everyday questions. And then somebody will say, that should be in the style guide. And then we usually tag Michael. And so I'm not sure exactly how many people he's working with at the moment, but I know he kind of keeps a small group close.
Okay.
Our voice and tone leads definitely contribute to the guide. I can get in there and write stuff too. But voice and tone also does like a lot of peer review and training as well. So I was just talking to somebody who at their company, it's a lot more formalized, where they have like a style council. There's one person who makes the final decision. They have monthly meetings. They, send out decisions that way. I think it depends on company culture too. At Intuit, we're pretty collaborative, and so kind of keep it loose that way.
Great, thank you.
Let's see. Oh, this is just no-brainer stuff. The smaller the team, I just said that, the quicker decisions get made, the guide's going to be done. Make sure you keep track of who's responsible for what. Like if somebody says, oh, that should be in the style guide, and, follow up and make sure somebody's doing it, right? Don't just let it disappear into the Slack either. And it's good to kind of meet up regularly just to keep the momentum going. So where is it going to live, and when is it going to be done? It's never going to be done, right? It's always going to evolve, and you should just kind of keep that in mind. You're going to definitely hit milestones, and it's going to be a relief, and you're going to be like, oh, I'm so glad not to be working on that anymore. But technology and language is always changing. So we were just talking before we started here about like you'll look back at your guide and go, oh my God, we're not even working on desktop anymore. Why do we have all these desktop entries,
Control-Alt-Delete.
Control-Alt-Delete. Yeah, exactly. You just get rid of that. So it's always going to be evolving, and it is going to need a minder. So there should be at least a few people kind of keeping an eye on it, thinking about when it's time to assess it or update it. And think too about like, how are you producing this thing? Because at some point, people are going to leave the company. And if you've got this really complicated site that's difficult to use and hard to update, it's just going to languish, right? So you want to make sure that it's something that can be handed off and easily updated. And also to think about like how often, I think we talked about that too, is just like, you're just going to do it on the fly. You're going to have, style council once a month to deal with things. This is going to be an annual thing. So just think about those things ahead of time. So let's actually get into some practical bits about how to put one together. So as with many things in life, you want to start small and then add more to it and build it up and make it a masterpiece. So starting small, think cupcake first, think style sheet. And so we talked a little bit about this earlier, is just list the most critical items. Like if you were to have somebody new come in and hand them like, oh my God, I need you to write this piece of whatever, what are the basic things that you need them to follow? So you might have some words in a word list, your capitalization style, numbers, dates, and times. Those are like, there's so many different ways to correctly format them, but you need to declare whatever your style is, right? So that would be a good thing to include. And write those up in a decent draft, and then stand back and assess your style sheet. That, like, how did the process feel? What does it look like? Show it to a few folks. Is it usable? Make some course corrections, and then move on. There's probably going to be stuff that you don't include, so just keep a list or parking lot it somewhere, because you can always come back to it later as the guide evolves. So when you're ready to move on from a style sheet, you can start adding more layers, and this is where you're going to look at competing and yet correct methods for things like lists, punctuation, contractions, capitalization, and put your stake in the ground. Declare which conventions you want to follow. A good tip is to look at the types of things that you typically have to correct in others, and see whether those should go in the guide or not. So build it up. Yeah, here is where you can start getting more granular, and this is super useful if you have a sizable team of content creators. And when you add this level of detail to the guide, it can help make the content sound like it's coming from a single voice. So here's a list of items to consider. We have entries for all these things in the list that you see here. So I'll just let you look at that for a sec. I don't really need to go over them individually. But yeah, think about whether these would be useful for your guide or not. And then lastly, make it a masterpiece. So at some point you're going to have this, nice, rich, juicy style guide, and you're going to feel like, wow, that's really great. So what's the next level? So when you've added a decent amount of content, maybe it's time to step back and look at the structure again. Is that structure still working? Maybe it's time to get feedback from other writers and see what they think about it. It also would be a good idea to maybe start including lots of examples. I have a little anecdote that I'll share about providing examples. You can definitely do that within each individual entry, but here's a thing that was recently added to our style guide. Is we have a really great writer in Australia named Emily, and she was in a bunch of projects where they had to deliver bad news to customers, and that's always awkward. And so she just kind of had a bunch of fire drills where she did that a lot in a short period of time. And so she came up with some principles and guidelines and a bunch of examples, and she shared it with our content team, and we're like, oh my God, that has to be in the style guide and the design system, because we all have to deal with that. So that's an example of how you can add stuff to make it a masterpiece, but also how you can include examples, because actually reading like the before and after of those is super helpful.
And are those templates for here's how you should respond, just change a few words, or are those principles? So think about voice and here and tone here. And
yeah, it's more principles. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's so many things going on in all the different Intuit products. Template wouldn't always necessarily work, and each situation is different, right? If we're having to apologize, hopefully we're not repeating the same mistake over and over again, that we would have a template for it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen templates fail a lot, so I always feel a little about them. I feel like there's some that work.
Yes.
For very specific situations, if you know that you happen to run into that problem a lot.
Yes.
And other than that, templates end up failing you more often than not.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, that is making me think of a template. Like there is a process that you can go through in one of our products where you either get approved or declined, and we do have templates for that. Mm-hmm. They've been sort of like scoped out to feel good in both situations, but it's something that you can sort of like pick up and reuse as needed. There, yeah.
A good template.
Yeah, a good template. Yeah. Last bit of advice: if you are going to have a style guide or be part of a design system, you really want to walk the walk on this one. You want to have a guide that follows your voice and tone guidelines if you have them, and definitely follows all of your style conventions, because you're just going to lose credibility if you don't. So whatever guidelines you have, make sure when you're publishing them, you've edited several times, you've proofread, you've got other people to do it, so that you're actually following your own guidelines.
I see you have a note down here about global audiences.
Yeah.
Do you involve at Intuit the people from your localization team within the style guide decision-making process, or is this something that they have their own style guide that they're working with, or how does that work?
I would say it's a bit of a hybrid. We love our global content partners, and at times they have been reporting into our group, and at other times not. But we don't want to make their jobs harder. Yep. And so where appropriate, we try and include tips and tricks to say, well, I'll give you a tip. So we have a readability guideline. We try and write between 5th and 8th grade. And one of those reasons is because it really helps our localization team. Right. So there are things like that. We've made word choices You could say select, choose, tap, whatever the action is. And select ends up working for our localization and translation teams the best. And so we will try and consult them. I will say that lots of times they're not as top of mind as they should be, but we do want to include them and try and make their writing lives easier so that they don't, we're not just throwing a pile of stuff over the wall and saying deal with it.
Yeah.
So I know we can be doing better there, but yeah.
Start is better than no start.
Start is better than no start. Yeah. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
So yeah, lastly, I'm going to say don't hog that thing, because with all the time and effort and brain power that you put into creating a style guide, it does sort of become your baby. You become protective of it and maybe even defensive of it at times, and really want to control access to it. But I think the care and feeding of it really should be shared with others for a lot of reasons. If a style guide lives with one person, it's going to die with that person. And if they leave the company or win the lottery or whatever, and they've been the ones controlling it, then it's not easy for others to pick it up. So you really want to build ownership and loyalty by letting others help with that. And I personally love working with the more junior folks on our team, sort of bringing them in. They aren't going to be as seasoned or have as much experience as, people with longer tenure there, but it really helps build their content muscles fast, and they get on board with the style guide. You end up with these nice sort of mentoring and coaching relationships. And it's really good for their visibility, right? I mean, I just think that's really important to really cultivate the younger, more junior folks on the team. So yeah, bring them in. And then lastly, just don't be afraid, ate my word there. Don't be afraid to share your style guide broadly, not just within your team, but with other teams too. Yeah. So that's kind of what I have to say at this point. I do have some style guide resources. So I think I'm kind of nerdy about this stuff. I love looking at style guides and seeing what other groups have done. Like, what are they documenting, how they organized it? What are the things that they're choosing to put in there? So I highly recommend going out and getting inspiration from other guides. I do want to say inspiration. You don't want to plagiarize what other folks have done. I was talking to someone who had done some work on accessibility guidelines for university, and they said they saw word for word some of their stuff had been cherry picked and put in another guide. So, just be careful not to borrow others' work or give them credit if you are going to use what they've come up with. Also, just want to call out a couple of tools that I like. The Google Trends, the Google Ngram Viewer are great. Like if you're weighing different terms, like should I use sign in or log in, you can sort of plug terms and phrases into those and see, how they're trending on the internet. And that can help you, break that deadlock in your mind of which term we should go through. Also, I wanted to include the design system resources that Michael likes to share because I think those are inspiring as well. We personally believe that if you're going to have a design system, you definitely need to have content in there. So Michael's put together a list and I borrowed it from him.
Borrowed. Yeah. With credit.
With credit, yeah. At least verbal credit.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Beth.
You are welcome.
I learned a lot. We have questions rolling in, and so we'll get to those. Yeah. Prepare yourself. Take a break, drink a water.
Okay.
Quickly, before we do that, just 60 seconds, show you everyone one more resource. I'm here. I work with Cordova. Beth is here in our office today. Cordova is just a tool, if you don't know about it, that helps teams write as one. What does that mean? It's a style guide tool, and I'm just going to show you for 2 seconds what that looks like. So you will now see that I am inside of Cordova. Just very quickly, if your content lives here, it gives suggestions to help everyone align to the same style guide. And so for instance, you see in this demo doc, it's giving me the suggestion that my company prefers using contractions for all common phrases. So every time it says it sees it will, it tells me to use it'll instead. It'll. So I click that, it changes it. Same thing a lot of other places. It can change in order to two. For plain language purposes, we want to try to keep things shorter and simpler whenever possible. Here's another plain language thing, changing each and every to just each. Each and every is a little redundant. Why bother? So just a lot of things like this. And all of that is controlled by the style guide that you build. And so here's something that Beth was talking about before. She mentioned this is, if you're interested, a good place that you can start and just start making a lot of decisions. So go down this list: capitalization, punctuation, dates and numbers, how you use emojis, what social media things matter to you. Go down these list of rules that we've built based off of going through a bunch of style guides ourselves, our own needs, my needs. I need these things in our style guide product.
Ashley's style guide.
Ashley says we need this feature.
Yeah.
And just a lot of user research, obviously, and interviews with people. What else do you need? What's missing here? So commas, dashes, hyphens, how you use dates and numbers, currencies, etc. So just a good resource. And all of these rules, along with some other things, plain language, spelling, grammar, brand voice, etc., come back into your content and provide suggestions, and that can be across teams. Mm-hmm. And so this is just one way that you can get started.
Yeah, no, I think this is a great way. I'm super excited to learn more about this. I know that we're rolling this out in Intuit. It hasn't come to my team yet, but yeah, I think there are other tools out there too where you can sort of pick up some of these learnings, but this is nice to have it all in one tool here. I think some folks do really well with one-on-one coaching, like if you're working with a writer and editor relationship, but a lot of companies don't have the budget to have editors or, time to do one-on-one coaching. And this is just going to make you a better writer and kind of give you a bunch of rules in-house you follow right away.
And I love edits like these where I've done this before. You wite the same word twice and then you skip it reading yourself, but Cordova fixes it for you. So anyway, saves my life sometimes.
Oh yeah, mine too.
So let's go back and answer some questions.
Okay.
And if you're interested in trying Cordova, you can go to Cordova.com. There's buttons all over the website, of course, where you can go and start your own trial. It's about 2 weeks long, and then you upgrade.
Sounds good.
Anyway, so Q&A, the important part. Let's go through these questions. So the first one, do you have any tips on deciding who should be involved in the writing of the style guide? We talked about this a little bit, but can you summarize again? Who exactly, how do you decide who needs to be in the room at that moment? It's different per company, of course, but.
So I have a lot of off-the-cuff answers here. And like if you talk to some of my colleagues and my bosses, they may have completely different answers. I think it's the people who get excited about it, right? I mean, if you are wanting that kind of guidance, if you have ideas, if you're a word nerd, and I think it's the people who are excited about it, who aren't going to consider it a burden.
Yep.
Yeah, and so I'm just trying to think back to the dim and distant past. I obviously had experience. I was excited to do it and into it. And then we brought in some other folks. One was a junior person who just had lots of really great writing inclinations. Like she hadn't had that much experience. She'd come from sort of a different background, but she got and grokked everything that had been done before. It was asking, great questions and had some suggestions. And so, yeah, I would say it's
find the enthusiasts.
Find the enthusiasts. Yeah, that's great. That's what I would do.
Yeah, great. So many questions. Let's see how many we can run through. What processes do you have in place to evangelize the style guide across your larger company beyond the content designers, so the style guide gets into the DNA of more people?
Well, we have our own house cheerleader, Michael Hager-DeVio.
He is definitely a cheerleader for style guides. I love it.
He is definitely a cheerleader, and he's just so well connected, and he just seems to know everybody. Without him, gosh, what would we do? We would need somebody like that, I think. I think too, it's helpful if you get sponsorship from, executives or other managers. I think too, doing road shows every so often is super helpful throughout the company. Lots of times there are groups too that maybe again, don't have writing as their main function, but
Yep.
do need to kind of pump out material for whatever reason.
Mhm.
And when I've participated in those things, those folks are just really grateful for guidelines to
Yep.
help them and not kind of have to think of those things on their own, or
Yeah.
like be worried that they don't even know what they're supposed to be looking at.
Yeah, we had Lisa from Twitter in here for a webinar not that long ago, and she was talking about actually this a lot. And she said one of the things that was most helpful for her was when she joined the company, getting that executive sponsorship immediately, just finding someone who would help her propagate these ideas and help the content team in general just share wider and make sure that this stays a priority across the company, especially in a very engineering driven company such as Twitter.
Yeah.
So sponsorship sounds key.
Yes.
What are the differences between voice and tone and a style guide? Do they need to be separate?
Oh gosh, yeah. I think I'll answer the second question first. I don't think they need to be separate. I mean, just as a writer myself, I kind of want everything in one area that I go to. But they are called out in a separate area in our style guide. So there's like the, like this is the area for writers, and this is the voice and tone guidelines, and then there's the usage and style stuff. So they are different in my mind. Style guide is really gonna be like what I consider the nuts and bolts of things. It's gonna have the preferred word list that you're using, like, with Intuit, we do all this financial stuff. So are you e-filing with a hyphen or e-filing with a camel cap or whatever? So all those little nuances of things, and what's your list style and everything. Voice and tone is really pretty different. It's how you sound as a company, right? Like your voice is going to be the characteristics, like, like Ashley, you are approachable and knowledgeable and friendly. You're quite welcome. But your tone is going to shift, right? Like I can always, like your voice is going to stay constant. Like Ashley is always friendly, knowledgeable, and approachable, right? So those are the three constants of voice. But your tone is going to flex depending on what the situation is. Like we're relaxed and chatty here today, but if there was, a little kid in the room, you might talk to them in a different tone. If the president of your company walked in, you might change your tone.
Button up a little bit.
There. If we're talking about something sad or difficult, then your tone is going to shift.
Yeah.
Versus, us getting all word nerdy here and talking about style and cracking jokes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that's really about how voice and tone is really about how people perceive the character of the company. And I don't mean character like persona, but
Definitely.
that kind of thing. And to me, it's different from all the style bits and stuff that you would include in a style guide.
And something really cool I've seen online, and I would suggest everyone goes and Googles and tries to find this, is I've seen some tone maps that people have created. And I don't know who created the first one, so unfortunately I can't give credit. But if you Google tone map or voice and tone map, you'll see those people who've created, if this is the situation, your tone should be this. And it's kind of this X and Y axis where the Y axis is super excited and happy, and the bottom of the Y axis is, I'm talking with my hands here, so I'm trying to explain it as well.
I know.
The bottom of the Y is a bit more reserved and buttoned up, and so along the X axis there are all these different situations, and so how do you respond along the Y axis according to the X axis situation? And anyway, they're great, and so I love them.
Yeah. Actually, our TurboTax team, those are the folks down in San Diego. We have like such great writers on that team, and they get called out for their voice and tone and their TurboTax experience as well. And they are awesome at putting together these charts. It's maybe not the XY axis, but it's like different characteristics and attributes, kind of mapped to where you are in the customer experience. Like if you're an onboarding experience, you might take your time and be a little bit more chatty. But if you're in an error state, how does your tone flex there? And is it different in a marketing thing versus in a product thing versus in a care situation? Those guys are great at that.
Exactly.
I wish I had that skill.
Yeah. Great. Let's see here. How much time do we have? 8 minutes. Let's see here. A lot of these questions are quite similar. How is the style guide delivered at your company? Print, online, or both?
It used to be print.
And now?
Yeah, and I love putting it out in print. And then it kind of moved to PDF, and then it moved into a Flare help system.
Mm-hmm.
And then, everything got all shaken up and rewrote, and the team changed and everything. And now it's part of the QuickBooks design system. And I believe that is a WordPress site.
Great.
Yeah.
And I love it. It's huge.
Yeah.
It's very useful.
Yeah.
Even just to reference. Let's see here. I know this seems like a silly question, but how do you get people to actually adhere to the style guide? As the only writer and content owner at my company, I feel like sometimes people take my style guide as a suggestion. Do you have experience enforcing the style guide?
Oh.
And I know you said earlier that Intuit is a bit more gentle with suggesting using the style guide, but do you have specific ways that you do enforce it?
No, not at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm just looking back on my experience at bunches of different companies. Lots of times I was the editor, and if you're going to spend time and money to have an editor look over writers' stuff and mark it up, then it's kind of by default.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to get enforced. And when I saw writers not taking my suggestions or doing that, then I would talk to them first,
mm-hmm.
and then
collaborative communication
and then you escalate,
mm-hmm.
and then the way we do it here at Intuit, well, we're not here at Intuit, and they're at Intuit down the way, is we have voice and tone training that people, when they're coming into the content group, they go through. And anybody can take that at any time if they need a refresher. We also do peer reviews where, you are weekly meeting with your peers and getting feedback on your writing. I also personally do a lot of coaching and trying to help folks that way. But in Intuit, we don't really have an enforcement mechanism. That's just not our way. But like I mentioned, I know that we are bringing Cordova in and launching it out kind of team by team. So I think that, by default, there's going to be at least like a base level of writing
mm-hmm.
stuff that gets enforced.
Mm-hmm.
It's really tricky when you are the only one and you're trying to get your style standards enforced. I do find that if I provide, like if I can meet one-on-one with somebody, or if I'm providing comments back and explaining, like, we use sentence style capitalization. And the reason we do that is because it's easier and quicker for people to comprehend that. And so if you're going to be using this title case capping here, readers are going to pause. They're not going to instantly understand it as much. And so you really want folks to read what you've written, right, and understand it. So don't you think you want to get on board with the capitalization and stuff? So there's a lot of sort of back and forth at the beginning, but we talk about sort of that, like you can see the light go on in somebody's eyes when they get content and how good content can help. So maybe a lot of work up front to sort of persuade a few key people, and then, hopefully they'll help spread the word.
The good word.
Spread the good word. Content everywhere.
Another question. How do you go about coming up with examples to add in your style guide? It can be really tricky to come up with the wrong way to say something, for example.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. Sometimes I love doing that. And sometimes it's like, I can't think of an example that is actually, workable. We just make.
I go out and just find bad copy. Like, this is an example of something I don't want us to be saying, or even if it's not bad copy, just something that is off-brand for us. So something that makes sense for a different company perhaps, but for Cordova, not the case.
Yeah.
And so not a good, bad, but a do and don't.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think sometimes it doesn't hurt to get too ridiculous about things, like we have a thing about tenses in our style guide, and you can just make stuff up like, the cat ate the food, the cat is eating the food, the cat will eat the food, just to kind of like bring it really
simple
down to basics and simple.
Yeah. And it's almost actually the more simple you make your examples, hopefully in a lot of cases, that will make it easier to really understand what the rules are and take that to your core and keep it.
Yeah, exactly.
If you make a really complicated example, it's far more likely that at least I will forget that example immediately.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So what pointers should be kept in mind for a company with the need for two different style guides, one for written content and the other for oral delivery? Never thought about a style guide for oral delivery before, actually.
Yeah. Wow, can you read that question again? I want to make sure.
What pointers should be kept in mind for a company with the need for two different style guides, one for written content and the other for oral delivery?
What pointers? Gosh. I don't know. I kind of want a Venn diagram, like where do they intersect and where are they different? Like what are the things that you would have in common that you can sort of reuse for both sides? And what's going to be different? I'm very curious about the oral side because I actually don't have experience with that.
Same. I almost feel as though with oral delivery, that can be deeply personal to a human. Like the way you present and the way I present could be completely different, and versus the way my CEO presents is a lot more exuberant and bouncy and more informal than myself. And so creating a style guide to try to hone both of our voices almost sounds, I don't know if it's worth the work.
Well, I'm thinking actually of like video scripts, right? If you're having training video scripts and stuff, that could be very different in terms of what you might say and what the pointers are and like how long your sentences are and like maybe repetition on a screen in written thing is not a good thing. You want more variety, but maybe it's very important in an oral thing. I really just don't know.
I'm sure there are resources online for this type of thing.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a stumper. Good one.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for stumping us.
Do you have in mind some workshops to work the style guide or even build your style guide with a team? So specific style guide workshops. I know there are a lot of resources on this out there.
Oh.
To make those decisions and come to decisions at all.
Come to decisions. No.
We've done a lot of those. So when we were deciding our voice and tone here, we did those, put two opposing words on either side and have a bunch of people in the room. So you put super formal on one side and really informal on the other side and have people in the room decide where they think Cordova is now and where they think Cordova should be and put little stickers, different colored stickers for both. And then we had a bunch of those different words opposing each other and everyone was putting like where we are now, where they think we should be stickers. And then from there, we were able to create a conversation about, okay, where are we agreeing? Where are we disagreeing? And how do we come to a consensus around what should be our future?
Yeah.
And that was a fun exercise.
Yeah.
It as you pointed out earlier, it created some tension where people were disagreeing, but I think that's normal.
Yeah. I do know that like a few years ago, we did a whole bunch of voice and tone work, and that was exactly what they did. It was a big project. It's like they went out and did research. They, interviewed everybody. They got us all together. It was really a kind of a core team sort of figuring out, on what end of the spectrum do we want to sound. That was super helpful for voice and tone. I think for some of the more nuts and boltsy kinds of stuff, gosh, I don't know. I know that we were doing things at Intuit, the Grammar Power Hour, just sort of like refreshing everybody's understanding of like, this is what passive voice is, and this is, now that you understand it, this is how it actually makes text longer, and here's some examples of how it manifests in our day-to-day work. I don't know, I think we did like 6 or 8 of those, and it was kind of informal. It was, just targeted for us, but it wasn't really workshopping the style guide so much. Our team is so big right now that I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, and I know for the rest of the style guide right now, what I'm seeing, and I think this is very positive, what I'm seeing a lot of people are leaning on accessibility guidelines to drive style guide decisions. So what is accessible, what is not? There are a lot of organizations out there. They're doing a lot of awesome research into this. Content Design London, which is over in the UK, has just published something about readability and accessibility, and that is a huge, amazing resource.
Yeah.
But I know a lot of people using these to drive other decisions in their style guide, myself included.
Yeah. We definitely have accessibility guidelines in our design system, and I use readability like help with so many different things, whether it's localization and translation, accessibility, just basic comprehension of things. One of the things that we talk about small businesses a lot at Intuit because that's who we serve, but there are a lot of small business owners who, English isn't their native language, right? So readability can help with that, right? It's like, how are you using readability to make everything that we're talking about that can be kind of complicated in the financial world accessible to everybody?
Yeah. For all readers, anyone who's out there.
Yes. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, there are more questions, but unfortunately we're out of time. And so if anyone has questions that you definitely want answered, you have our email addresses here. Try not to overload Beth, but feel free to overload me. I'll triage for her.
Thank you.
And I hope everyone learned a lot. I know I did. And thanks so much for joining. If you have Cordoba questions, I saw a few. I didn't want to bother wasting time with that here, but feel free to reach out and I will answer all of those questions for you.
Cool. Well, thank you, Ashley. This was fun.
Thank you. Thanks for everyone for joining.